This is Tom Morgan for The Leading Edge with the wonderful Emily Lane. I'm very excited for this conversation. Emily, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tom. I'm so excited too. I have no idea where it's going to go, and that's what's thrilling about it.
Yeah, well, I think it's traditional in podcasts to have the guests introduce themselves, which is usually a little bit boring and rote. I think in your case it probably isn't going to be. So, Emily, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I suppose the short story you'll figure out pretty quickly that I'm from Ireland from the accent. I do the short bio. So, like, I grew up in Ireland in a conservative part of Dublin. One parent Catholic, one parent Protestant, which is very rebellious back in those days. And it was quite informative in my world. Um, Fast track to going to university, studied English psychology, and then went into the corporate world and went as fast as my legs could carry me up the corporate ladder. And then got to a point of, a little bit of burnout, not once, not twice, but three times, where it was like, kind of took me a while to kind of get the message that my soul was trying to give me. And then, so I decided I was going to go traveling around the world. And this is where, Tom, like, as you know, like the story starts to kind of fork a little bit in the literal river. Because I had a death experience when I went traveling around the world. I decided I was going to take time out. I'd never had taken time out between college and university and starting work. So I thought, oh, I'm going to take a year. 2 weeks into that, we were whitewater rafting down the Pasasa River in Ecuador, and the boat capsized, and we had a freak accident. That death experience that I had informed so many things. It really threw me into an existential crisis where I knew that I couldn't go back, but I had no idea what I was going to. So the big questions come up, the last thoughts I had as I was having that experience just before I had left my body was like, oh my God, like what a beautiful place to die. Because we were in the jungle. I was alone. There was no one around. I'd been separated from the boat that was taken in a rip current downstream towards a waterfall where there was a fork in the river. And on one side, certain death, and the other side, possible survival. The last thought I had was like, what a beautiful place to die. And then I thought, I really hope they find my body. This is the level of detachment from reality I had. I was like, I really hope they find my body because it's going to be hard for my parents if they don't. And then I thought, my poor little sister, they'll never let her out of the house now that I've died, because she's an adventurer as well, right? But now it's all over. And that just as I was leaving, I had this one last thought, Tom. And that thought was like, oh my God, I just started living. I just started living because I felt the freedom of getting out of a social formula about what life should look like, and got into this feeling of traveling around the world, discovering new cultures, connecting with other people, and feeling something, some part of me coming online that had never been there before, and so or had been hidden at least. And then I left my body, and that story, I mean, I could tell that story, it's a 3 hour story and we could make it into a film. But actually, the things that are really potent here is a starting point of evolutionary intelligence, although I didn't know it at the time. But when I left my body, I had this incredible feeling of lightness. And just before, I felt this huge expansion. And I could feel like just a sense of like unfettered, super expanded, and almost like a still silence that was behind all things. And the funny thing is, Tom, like I'd actually had that experience when I was a child quite a few times, but I didn't know what it was at the time. I used to sit on the little footstep outside our family home when I was like 6, 7 years old. And on the very rare occasion in Ireland when the sun was out, the plastic piping on the houses across the road, when they swelled up with the heat of the sun, they would crack. So I would sit there as a little one, just observing the crack, crack, crack in the pipes. But what I was really tuning into is that in between the sounds, there was space and there was silence and there was an expansion. And I used to travel into that. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but it was the starting point, the same experience many years later when I was drowning in Ecuador. It's this feeling of something, some presence behind all things. So back to the drowning experience. So that was my experience. And I got lighter and lighter. I was like, well, and then I lost consciousness. I was hypoxic. I couldn't stand. My legs were, arms were gone. It was all, yeah, I had like all kinds of injuries in my body. Anyway, next minute I know, bang, and I'm back in the bottom of the boat. And I'd been rescued at the last minute. And long story short, 9 Belgian people had drowned in that exact spot the previous year, but they didn't tell us that when we were signing up. So this really led to a literal fork in the river, and a literal, like, it's a perfect metaphor, because it started me off on an existential quest for answers. And I think probably you can probably relate to this, right? It's like, how come when I followed all the rules of society, got the good job, the good education, went all the way with my career, was doing good in the world, how come I felt so dead inside? And now when I'm feeling alive, traveling the world, how come I'm now feeling so like I just started, something missing, massively missing? So I suppose the long story short is that it catapulted me into a big quest to find the meaning of life. And it was a 20-year journey, but it started off with a little bit of naivety. And I think it's just kind of so sweet. Do you ever look back in yourself and kind of go, like, I love you so much, younger self, because, you know, the innocence of it. So I really, in my quest to find the meaning of life, I had no tools for doing that, because even though I'd studied psychology, that didn't answer existential questions. Religion hadn't answered existential questions because there were gaps in some of the pieces. So how do I find answers? And in my corporate trained left brain, I did the next logical thing, which was to create a spreadsheet to find the meaning of life. And what I wanted to do, my strategy was, I'm going to get all the top 10 Eastern philosophy books. This is before ChatGPT. And I'm going to take each one of those and I'm going to read each one. And I'm going to create a summary paragraph of each one individually. I'm going to track it on a spreadsheet. And then I'm going to, at the end, when I finished all top 10, I'm going to get a composite of all 10 of them. And then I'll have the meaning of life. And then I'll be able to get on with things because I'm busy. Do you know? Right. So this was kind of the first attempt, you know, the first step, and fair play, you know, looking back. And also, like, obviously it took a little bit longer. So it catapulted me into a quest. Very shortly after that, met a shaman who turned my world upside down, because she spoke words to me as an Aboriginal shaman who looked straight into me and told me words about my interior that I have no idea how she knew, because I hadn't said a word. So how was she reading my interior? It was deeply disturbing, you know, as a logical professional person. And I ran away very fast. See ya. Anyway, then I went into a big quest over 20 or so years, really researching every discipline that you can think, anything consciousness related: nutrition, shamanism, plant medicine, spirituality, meditation, like it's all there, right? All kinds of experiences, just fill in the blank, right? And at a certain point, then I began to really explore, how can we weave this back into practical reality? And that's where circling back into that wonderful training, the linear training that I'd had in the corporate world, actually became hugely important. So when I came back, what I was doing was creating connectivity between the mystical and the practical. And so I started to co-create these beautiful leadership circles. Around 2017, I began, and then 2018 started to create more momentum. And then since then, I've been continuing incrementally, lots of different iterations. Two more kind of touch points, I would say, is that kind of thresholds, like we all have thresholds, right? 2020 was a big threshold. I'd received what's called Shaktipat, which is a spiritual blessing, in 2019. Mid 2019, early 2020, mum passed away. And it was before COVID, thank goodness, because we got to honor her properly. But the impact, Tom, of like losing your mom, the kind of impact on my system was just so immense. And then shortly after that, Dad had a heart attack and we went straight into COVID. So there was a kind of stacking in my interior that was so much pressure that it kind of cracked me open, cracked open my psyche, the next level of the psyche opening. And in the middle of June of 2020, I was in a client session with a leader. And as I was sitting there, I suddenly started to get visual information. And this is my request to go full woo woo here, because
Bring it.
yeah, visual information started to appear. Then I started to hear things and I started to sense things. It just happened spontaneously, it just opened up because of all that pressure. So I was like, this is weird. And kind of cool, because I knew about clairvoyance, clairaudience, and clairsentience. I knew about them, but I hadn't, and I'd been wanting them, but I hadn't experienced them directly. So instead of going full on into it, I just said, oh, geez, I better check this. I'm not imagining this. So I kind of checked with my client. I kind of said, hey, I'm getting an intuitive insight that blah, blah, blah. Anyway, checked out correctly the data that I was given. And I'm talking about, Tom, like specific information about a word in a chapter of a book she was writing the previous day. She'd had a conversation about that word. I mean, that level of specificity that's undeniable. And I continued to validate that whole day. There were about 15 different validations. And I've been kind of going continuously since then, validating for many years. But there came a tipping point in 2023 when I had a spontaneous opening, another level again, inside a business meeting. Now, you're a sensible corporate man, you know the world, right? Me too. I was in a conversation with a corporate lawyer, really sharp lady. And she said to me, Emily, like really strongly, really grounded woman, big international lawyer, goes, Emily, tell me, what is this body of work? And there was something about the directness of how she asked me that it just opened and it pulled it through me. Because this is one of the big shifts, moving from the by me personality thing to opening up and things coming through me, right? This is for all of us. And when she said that, this vision appeared in the field of a wave of energy moving through the cosmos. And I looked at it, I was like, whoa, what is that? And this is all in the interior. Like I wasn't saying that externally to her. I was like, whoa, what is that on my inner world? And then I was like, whoa, that wave it's not just any energy. That energy it's changing everything in its pathway. It's like turning the cosmos. It's moving the galaxy through the cosmos. It's turning the planet on its axis. It's changing the seasons in its wake. And it's like, oh, that's affecting us collectively and personally. I'm like, that's evolution. And I was like, but that's not just, that's intelligent. I was like, whoa, that's evolutionary intelligence. I was like, bam. And so it arrived in and it landed in that moment, in that circuitry that I had with her, the plus and minus the battery. Her asking was so strong that it opened my interior and then the answer flowed through. And it was so delicious because it was the let's say the icing on the cake. It was the culmination of all the preparations that had happened before that moment. And since then, I've been working with this beautiful force that's in the universe, which is evolutionary intelligence. And the purpose of this is to help humanity make this great transition that we find ourselves in, personally, collectively, systemically, and globally. So I guess it brings us right up to today. I know it's a very long answer, but I hope it makes sense and resonates. And well, it makes sense to me. It was my experience. And I also can say I feel so glad, like while I look back and I kind of go, I could have made those experimenting years much shorter. Actually, I'm so glad I didn't, because of that, I've had such duty of care in the way that I've worked with this multidimensionality, that it's solid. It's sure. And so that gives me, real sense of like what I stake my soul in the ground with, which is love, light, and clarity. Yeah, there's a lot of clarity, a lot of love, and a lot of light here for all of us. Yeah. So that's all the way up to this moment, my friend.
I have like 90 different things I want to say. One day I want to hear more detail about your near-death experience. I would say that like the pattern recognition side of me you just see a whole bunch of people that have near-death experiences or like death experiences and come back with some sort of ability based around non-local consciousness. Um,
Yes.
like I literally met someone last week, and it is a surprisingly ubiquitous pattern, which I've got absolutely no reason why. But also I really love the what you said about taking a while to bed it in. There's a lot of things like plant medicine around at the moment, and people do have these kinds of powers and capabilities that kick in directly after plant medicine. Sometimes they last, sometimes they don't. But then I always find that you can't necessarily trust the integration and the insights. And like,
Yes.
personal preference, I don't do those things, but I trust that the insights I do get are kind of slightly more grounded and I'm able to integrate them a little more, even though it's a much, much unsexier way of doing it. Which leads me into a question, or really the point of exploration, which is the reason why I'm so excited to speak to you, aside from the fact you're just obviously awesome, is this concept of evolutionary intelligence that, I met with a group last week and we were talking about how if you could only really get one idea into the mainstream of all of the crazy different rabbit holes I've been down over the last, 10 or so years, it's this idea of evolutionary intelligence. The framing I've always been drawn to is that you got your left hemisphere that's kind of abstracted from the world, and then you've got your right hemisphere that's connected to this evolutionary intelligence, which is I've called it the most taboo idea in Western culture, that because it implies that there's something, benign and more sophisticated than our intellect, which is a very, very heretical idea. But interfacing with it has been the thing that has improved my life the most from like a deeply
Mm.
practical perspective. So like that's maybe a jumping off point for us. Like, what is evolutionary intelligence for you and how do you interact with it? And how can people listening to this interact with it as well?
Mm. Beautiful. Fair play. So many different, I have so many things I want to respond to as well. Okay, to answer the question directly, let's take it from this perspective. So you speak about left and right hemisphere. We're at a time of, and I will answer the question directly in a very practical way, but I want to create context because context is everything. It's so important at this moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
So we, as we know, are at an absolutely crucial moment in the evolution of our society. Our planet's going to be fine. The only question is whether or not we get kicked off or not, right? We have this so-called meta crisis, which is actually a meta opportunity for evolution. I'd like to reframe it as a meta opportunity because it's causing us to collectively focus and open up to new ways of being, new ways of acting, and so on. So if we think about consciousness itself as rising like a water table, yes, no one escapes. It's affecting all of us. It is creating this change, right? So up until this point in time, humanity has been what I would call matter locked in its consciousness, right? And so you speak about the left brain, definitely directly connected to it, logic, linearity, tangibility. If it's not tangible, it's not real, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, that's so illogical because there's a massive bypass that's happened unconsciously in our society. And that massive bypass is the structure of the atom, which is the building block, the fundamental building block of our reality. It's a scientific fact. We all agree, right? But the structure of the atom is 1% matter, 99% energy, which means that you and I are 1% matter, 99% energy. And the same is true of our organizations, social systems, culture, and indeed planet. It's all 1% matter, 99% energy. So how is it possible as a society that we have put 100% of our attention on 1% of the equation? How is that possible? This is the genesis of matter-locked consciousness. And it's where we limit ourselves entirely. So if we are to have an evolutionary leap, which, let's be honest, nothing less than that will do at this moment in time with this meta opportunity that we have, if we do not shift our our orientation from matter to the whole picture, we basically won't make it, because we will lock ourselves into that which we already know. So we are masters of linearity. We are masters of tangibility. We are masters of the logical and therefore the known, okay? The tricky thing is for the intellect is that the evolutionary leap requires us to turn towards the other 99% of reality and move into the intangible, the energetic, the unknown, and the possible. And so this is the space where the interface begins to unfold between, as you rightly point out, the interior access point being right brain, which is the sensing central nervous system, central channel nervous system, sensing intuitive aspects of our intelligence. But this is so key to get beyond the limitations of human intellect and to recognize, right, that it's very obvious that there's a hugely more sophisticated intelligence that's birthing planets, galaxies, stars, etc., that's running the cosmos. And the big blind spot that we have is that we have maybe not realized or perhaps forgotten that it's not just happening at the celestial body macro level. We also have a personal relationship with this energy that is moving worlds, that is birthing galaxies. And so this is the first step, the context, and then the mental understanding of the logic of the structure of the atom, the personalizing into the interior. That left brain is great. We're not losing intellect. We love intellect. We need sharp minds, and we've already got them because we're practiced. So the evolutionary leap is actually into the other 99% of reality to understand, hey, hang on a second, maybe the opportunity is here in the thing that we've not yet mastered. And so this is where evolutionary intelligence comes in. Evolutionary intelligence is the force itself behind all things, that great scientists like Max Planck, like Albert Einstein, spoke about brushing up against this thing. That, once every great scientist will truly great scientists will recognize that beyond a certain point, you brush up against something that is the spirit behind all matter. Einstein's words, right? And it gives me goosebumps. I got goosebumps even now, like feeling that, right? Right? So there's a logic to the magic. And so then we have this personal relationship, this personal calling. And so the question is, how do we now begin to recognize not just the personal, although it begins there, but also the collective, and then also beyond that, the calling to systemic change? And how can we create direct relationship, which is with the unified field, but with a specific force within the unified field, which is that call to evolution within our own interiors, right? So this is so delicious because it opens us up, and like, again, just going to go there because it's the opening up, not just into the energetic world, but also to the spiritual world. Because what is spirituality? It's non-physical, not in physical, non-physical, energetic, and spirit is all the same thing, right? It's the same thing. And so there are multidimensional beings that are assisting us in many different ways and faculties. And we can go wherever you want to go with that, right? I'm up for all the way. And I will just say one thing. So learning the skills to extract from matter-locked consciousness, which is what happens every time somebody has a near-death experience, Tom. This is what happens. Remember you said, like, you see people like have this thing and it's kind of consistent, but what they've done is they've extracted from personality. They've extracted from their matter-locked reality. And then they've had an expanded experience, right? But very important point that you raised is that's great and that's beautiful. And it's so important to then integrate. So how do we then integrate that and bring it back down into practical reality, personally, collectively, and systemically? but also to do this not just to a death experience, but to have less dramatic experiences, less dramatic experiences of connecting to the unified field of evolutionary intelligence, and to practice a skill set that will allow us to move out from the known into an expanded view and bring it back into the possible reality that's available to us at a higher frequency, right? We really want to start creating, co-creating, all of us, higher frequency, personal, collective, and systemic realities. That's what we're being called to. Mm-hmm. So does that make sense? All of this, the kind of tracking of it and the logic, and yet somewhere in the middle, the mystical as well, right?
Well, I've always said to people that if you assume, like, I don't think people really care about like the definitions of like panpsychism, idealism, yada yada. Like no one actually knows what they mean and no one cares. But if you have this premise of like everything is energetic or everything is consciousness, everything that is woo woo comes back on the table. And it doesn't mean it's all right. There's a lot of really dumb stuff in that community, but it means it goes back on the table because non-physical phenomena and the possibilities around non-physical phenomena get more pronounced. But so one thing I always find interesting is that my gateway drug to all of this was Joseph Campbell, and I'm sure my listeners are bored of me saying my favorite quote, which is "Follow your bliss, and doors will open where only there were walls," which is a direct relationship to evolutionary intelligence, which is like we've been telling this story for God knows how many hundreds of thousands of years that people are in stasis. They're matter locked, perhaps, or they're just in a cubicle that they hate, right? And then you have this call to adventure, which is this fundamentally energetic impulse, which makes no sense typically because it's an evolutionary impulse. So you reject the call, you go back to working in the cubicle, and then you have a crisis because evolution abhors stasis and selects against it. Then you go into this horrible crisis where you go to battle against everything that's holding you in, and then at the end of it, ideally, you learn to let this thing flow through you.
Yeah.
Now, for all of these ideas, I'm like, all right, like it may surprise some people. Like I live a pretty pedestrian life with a pretty much zero count on mystical experiences, apart from one I had in 2017, which started this whole journey. So I'm always like, well, how do normies interface? Because one of the things that's if you take your first premise that reality is energetic, which I think like I had exactly this conversation with like my most rationalist friend. He was like, dude, everything's made of molecules. I'm like, what are molecules made of? And then he kind of got a little bit annoyed at me. And then you have this thing where two of the smartest people in my community who are both very grounded, they're like, if you want to get yourself out of a stuck place, what you do is you start an energy diary. So what you do for a couple of weeks or ideally longer, you track what's giving you like positive energy and you track what's draining it. And then that helps you navigate in a deeply practical way with a little bit of metacognition towards this evolutionary intelligence, which you have to accept is fundamentally energetic. But it sounds like you have even more sophisticated understanding and relationship with that. So if you're like a normie, where do you start?
Well, I really like that analogy. I really like that. Let's say it's not an analogy, but I really like that tool. I would say that there are. So I'd like to build on that tool. I think that's very cool. I'll just give you kind of like my version, and then I want to go to maybe a toolkit a little bit as to how we can begin to integrate. And I'd love to also go to the super mystical as well, because I'd love to share some experiences with you because they're wild. But I do want to say that this piece about grounding. This is why evolutionary intelligence is this body of work is I feel so passionately about it, is because in the world there's so much separation. There's either super linear, super excellent professional excellence essentially, or there's kind of floaty, off the groundy stuff happening, and there's so little integration, and that's what we need now more than ever. We need excellent professionals, professional excellence, and essential brilliance. And essential brilliance is the brilliance of being, right? Who you are at your soul level. And so it's allowing the light and radiance of who you are to flow through unobstructed, connected to the divine source of who you are in your soul codes, right? While you're operating with professional excellence. And so that's a piece I really want to bring in. It's like having logic and magic, right? It's having like for things to make sense and resonate. Then you know you're working with all intelligences in your system. And this is why this piece of integration, it's very, very important at this moment in time. It's just not enough for us to have, kind of hippie-ish stuff happening and then just, limited stuff happening. And sometimes that split time is happening, not just in like groups of a kind of hippie vibe over here and then just pure hardcore capitalism over here. Actually, sometimes the splits in our own interior. So like I know in Irish culture growing up, I was like, we go to mass on Sunday between 10 and 11, and that's when we say our prayer, like, and that was my context, right? But like, what about the rest of life, the rest of the week? Like, what other practices do we have? And so maybe this is a way to bring it back around to your question about how do we interface with this practically. I want to come to, let's go to that piece that you just used, which I think is beautiful. One of your people was talking about this, tracking the logic. Absolutely, do that 100%. We call that the book of evidence, right? But the book of evidence for what? The book of evidence for your connectivity to the higher intelligence, right? So how do we come into, before all that, how do we come into a place of connectivity with this higher intelligence? So for me, there's a kind of a very clear process. Number one, there's the process of stability, right? That's personal stability. And personal stability comes from practices, right? Comes from practices, daily practices. And there's lots of different levels of practices, but let's come to the architecture of you. When we're talking about ourselves, we speak about our physical body. When we're talking about the body, we talk about the physical body. I'm going to suggest to you that we have 5 bodies. We have the mental body, the emotional body, the energetic body, the physical body, and then the spiritual body, or you, the soul. And so when you, the being, became incarnate in flesh, when you came into the structures of the mental, emotional, energetic, and physical, that became a way for you, the being, to interface with the world. Now, when we're looking to have experiences for the soul to grow, for you, the soul to grow, right? So when we come here, we come with certain soul codes encoded. We access them through our hearts, the heart's desires, right? We feel that heart's yearning. Heart's yearning is never anything to do with ego. It's not like I want the next Porsche. The heart's desire is like, I want to love. I want to contribute. I want to help regenerate Gaia. That kind of coding goes in here. So when we're building our practices, Tom, we want to speak to all 5 bodies. A lot of time we think of it just as a mental practice, but there's very important steps that we include all 5 bodies. So we want to look at mental mastery, emotional mastery, physical mastery, energetic mastery. And then when we get those 4 bodies, the containers, the architecture for our experience, into alignment, into coherence, in sounding one note, yes, one note, not mixed messages going on, one note, then the soul can come through. So what about the practices that we can co-create, that we can create as a way of being? Very simply, beginning the day with morning practices is really important. There's different ways you can do this. Morning practices, on-the-go tactics, and evening practices. Now, these are ways. And one thing I really want to stress is that, because I know for me, when I was going through different steps in the process, I kind of got to a point where I was like overwhelmed with the amount of tools I was supposed to be integrating. And I just wanted to take that all off the table and just really invite anyone listening to this to just tune into what's the one thing that's resonant for you. One thing. Okay. So very briefly, I can give you maybe a couple of tools for each moment of the day, and then we can speak about maybe deeper stuff, at a multidimensional level. But basic tools to begin the day is, the first one is, and I love this because it's very special, because it's maybe at a deeper level of connectivity to evolutionary intelligence, and it's celestial rain catching. Now, that sounds a bit woo-woo. Woo alert! But all it is, very simply, very relatably, is that when you are just waking up and you come to the half space, the liminal space, before your thinking mind comes online, there's a window there where the unconscious mind is open, where you're kind of half in the dream state, and when you've got greater connectivity to the field. The key thing is that you're not already locked into the program of yesterday's thoughts. That's a window, Tom, that if you can have intentionality to leverage that connectivity, when you wake in the morning, you move very slowly. You stay with it as long as you can and hold it. And then you have beside your bed a pen and paper, and you literally, without engaging mind, it takes a little practice, but you take dictation from the divine, transcribe that which you are receiving, seeing, feeling, hearing, knowing, sensing. That's it. No interpretation. That's really important. It's like stream of consciousness. No interpretation, just dictation. Okay, that's a tool that people don't often speak about. That's really important. Marie Curie was working on the great scientist, right? Double Nobel Prize winner. She was actually working on a challenge for, I think it was 3 years, 2 or 3 years. And she'd been working on it and working, trying to solve it from personal intellect for so long. And it got to a tipping point where she was just like, okay, that's it. I give up. Keywords. I give up. And that's a little bit like in the death experience. I give up my personality. I give up my matter locked consciousness. I give up my personal intellect. And the egoic solving, very particular imprint in that vibration behind those words, egoic solving, right? So I give up that, I let go. And when she did, she wasn't giving it up intentionally. It was a retro-engineered understanding, retrofitted understanding. She woke in the middle of the night in kind of a trance, went over to her desk, picked up probably would have been pencil at the time, pencil, went over and just wrote down the solution, but kind of in a trance, went back to bed and fell asleep. Forgot she'd got up in the middle of the night, woke up the next morning, went to bed her morning, and then passed the table and saw the answer written down. Right? She saw the answer written down because it was from beyond her. And the key thing is she let it go. Einstein operated this way as a way of being, actually, as a way of being. He was searching for patterns. You talk about pattern recognition, searching for patterns and taking observations from nature. The indigenous people do this. They watch the flow of nature.
Yeah. I last year for my series, I interviewed this guy, Dr. Stephen Larson, who is Joseph Campbell's biographer and collaborator. And when I stopped recording the interview, he was like, "Oh, have you heard of Emanuel Swedenborg?" And I was like, "Nope." And he was like, "Oh, he was probably the greatest visionary of all time." I was like, "Wait, what? What?" And anyway, the TLDR on Emanuel Swedenborg is that he lived in like the 1700s. He completed knowledge, right? Like there was only so much science you could know in 1700, so he just read it all. And then when he got to his like 50s, he was like, "I'm going to go inside," and he switched his mode of focus to interior. And there's a lot of interesting stuff that happened. But what happened is that one of his big takeaways was the period between sleeping and waking in the morning. He would get these downloads. And he went from being this quite abstracted intellectual, where it's like everything's coming out of my own brain, to being like, "Oh, it's God giving me the ideas." And he flipped entirely. And what's weird is that, as woo-woo as this all sounds, this is how I operate now, which is in a much less sexy way. But like, I'll often get all of the ideas for my new articles, or just the resolution of the ideas I've been playing with, first thing in the morning. And I guess what I need to do is, I do sleep with my phone away from my bedside, but I think I'm going to start putting it in a next door room, because otherwise I'm going to truncate that period.
Right. Good words. Good catch. Amazing. Good for you. Oh my God. I remember hearing this. This is exactly on point, Tom, like super on point. This is it's the most golden hour of the day. And it's usually not an hour, it's usually a few minutes, but you can run off that then if you follow it. I do remember this very funny story from one of the great teachers in the personal development arena, Dr. John DeMartini. And he always talks about how he's read, I think it's like 28,000 books or something, and how he met this one. He's like full on dedicated intellectual, and he's genius at that piece. But I remember him so specifically describing how he met this amazing woman who subsequently became his wife. I think her name was Athena. And when he first met her, he was like, "This woman's lazy," because she would stay in bed for like 6 hours a day. And there he'd be off there on the computer for 8 hours straight, and she would stay. But what he didn't know until he got to know her was that actually she was communing with the field in that half sleep state, and how it used to kind of annoy him that he'd go and work hard, and then she'd get up, sit in front of the computer, download the article, 12 grand. We're like chilling, and literally and the joy as well, because this is the other, while he was like still working hard to compile something, and here's the thing, it's very important not to dismiss intellect, because we love intellect, we need to combine the two though, and this is where the balance is. But this is the other thing, is that our society's become so toxic, so dysfunctional in its excessive levels of stress and strain and efforting, and it's not meant to be like that. We just got disconnected from Gaia. We got our feet off the planet, so we've got no electricity coming. We're running on battery biologically. We don't have our feet on the ground. When you connect to Gaia, you connect to the Schumann resonance. You connect to your natural electromagnetic frequency, which is part of the practices, which is where when you connect to your physical body, whether you swim in her waters or you walk on her surface or you lie down, ideally, or you do your gardening, you're touching her. When you do that, your whole system begins to be plugged into an electricity source. Rather than when you're wearing shoes, you're running on the bio battery of the physical body alone. You're cut off from her. So we all know batteries run out. Electricity is like plug it into the mains. Why wouldn't you, right? So one of the beautiful things is that grounding and earthing is another key practice that we can do, like in the morning, but also during the day and to close the day. But the piece that I was just wanting to say is that, like, we're not meant to be working this hard. We're not meant to be working this hard. The reason why we're working this hard is because we're pushing matter around. That's why we're working so hard, because we got programs of limitation. But if we learn how to work with energetics, we begin to work with a non-linear. We create a vortex of attraction within our own field. We magnetize that which we're desiring to us, as long as we're clear, clean receivers, right? Mm-hmm.
So what else would you recommend people do?
Okay, so first of all, so at the beginning of the day, there's the liminal space, there's the earthing, grounding, moving the physical body. I do want to point out something really important in relation to meditation. So often we speak about meditating at the beginning of the day. That's beautiful. You may need to go and exercise your physical body first before you meditate. And certainly once you've got into the day, if you're trying to meditate and the day is already underway and you're halfway through the day or it's the end of the day, do not try and meditate while you are running in your mind. Make sure you run with your physical body or lift weights or go to the sauna or do whatever to clear the energetic charge from your system, so that when you come to meditate, that you're in a more calm space. Meditation is a crucial doorway, like absolutely crucial. If you're not meditating, you're not leveraging, right? If you're not meditating, you're not leveraging. You're not leveraging your connection. So why? People think that they have to go into absolute states of bliss in meditation. And by the way, meditation is a massive topic and there's so many different interpretations. I just want to offer this one thing. Do you remember when I was saying earlier on, Tom, and I was talking about the plastic pipes in the little neighborhood and little kids sitting on the step, listening to the gap between the noise and traveling into it and being hypnotized? What we're looking for in meditation is we're looking to quieten the mind, not to delete thoughts, but to quieten the mind, right? And so why are we wanting to quieten the mind? The mind, that intellectual egoic space, is it's all personality. It's running old patterns. It's running habituated patterns of thought, existing neurological practice, neurological networks, associated thoughts. When we go into that quiet space where there's an expansion and a connectivity and a presence, we're now in receivership of possibility. So from a physics perspective, we're moving from energy as particle, meaning tangible reality, into waveform. We're opening ourselves up to receiving the download, the inspired thought, the connection with their own soul. And this is why people have epiphanies in the shower. Because They're just not thinking. They're not doing that linear cognitive thought thing. So meditation, whatever, again, that's a huge topic, but meditation is essential. So that would be to begin your day, to set your day up. Then we move into kind of on the go tactics. And during the day, it's just super important that you extract out of the intensity and the density of that which is like in your on your to-do list, in your immediate environment. Extracting out of an office environment, absolutely vital. Getting your feet on Gaia as much as you can, even if it's for 10 minutes. One tool is to look into the distance. And the reason why we look into the distance is, imagine a lion is chasing you. Are you going to be focused on anything other than the lion? We know this about the limbic brain, right? We go into small, short distance focus. So when we're in the limbic brain, when we're in linear cognitive thought, when we're in action mode. So to balance it, to begin to access the field beyond just the own personal intellect and interior, we want to look into the distance to go wide. So if you can go into peripheral awareness and look into the distance, that will help you regulate your interior. Okay, that's another tool. There's so many tools. I will say, I don't want to do too many. I'll just do one more, which is to close down the day. And something that people aren't really aware of is just how much, if you go to sleep without closing down your day consciously, you're just going to take the whole day with everybody else's energy that you've been interacting with into bed with you, and you'll have like the most, invasive space in your dream state. You have to create space in your interior. Close out the day consciously. One of the most valuable things you can do is to have a salt shower or a salt bath, right? And so what salt does is, think about it. What happens when you jump in the ocean? What happens when you jump in the ocean?
I feel amazing. That's what I got.
Yeah. Right? Partly because of the cold. And so when the cold comes in, and cold actually helps with all kinds of things, but partly the cold, unless you're in like the Bahamas or something. But for most of us, it's the cold, right? But also because water absorbs energy and information, and salt breaks it down. So when you jump in the ocean is always more refreshing than going to the lake, because when you're in the salt is actually cutting all the energetic connections from your system, and this is freeing you up. Do you ever notice how chill surfers are? So chill. And it's not just because they're having a spliff, it's because they're connected to the literal flow of the energy of Gaia. Like, it's amazing how chill, and it makes so much sense. But you can have that experience too, just even jumping in the ocean if you have access to the ocean. If you don't have access to the ocean, salt shower, salt bath. Very simply, wet salt bath, 20 minutes in a cup and a half or 2 cups of salt in the bath. Let yourself soak, allow all that energy to cut through. And then if it's a shower, you just wet your body, put salt on. Fine grain, by the way, don't do coarse grain, you leave marks all over your body. Fine grain salt all over, including your head. Let it just sit there for 2 minutes and then wash it off. And I promise you, if you try it tonight, you will experience that impact. And by the way, I'm not making this up out of my head. This is actually from a energy medicine training. I've trained in the science of energy medicine, so I'm on kind of a few different levels. So it's from that teaching, and that discipline is pranic healing. It's a wonderful lineage. I do recommend it. So it's something I learned from that. But all good energy healers will have that understanding. It's why when you go to healing rooms, sometimes you'll see saltwater bowls in the room. If they know what they're doing, they'll have saltwater bowls in the room. That's why. Yeah.
It's the second time this week I've read about taking salt baths in the evening, so I'll take that as a good sign. It's funny, I'm just a deeply tedious person, and I'll always go back to the same framing. But it is interesting to me that meditation is always about calming the verbal part of the brain, which again is the left hemisphere, which is keeping you abstracted away. And then the wide focus. McGilchrist ends his second book, which is a masterpiece, with this story about Carl Jung meeting a leader at Taos Pueblo, an indigenous Native American. And the Native American says, the white man is doomed. And Carl Jung says, why? And basically the leader takes his hands and puts them wide, and then brings them in front of him to a narrow point, and says the white man can only see one narrow point ahead. And then later, one of the same guys who witnesses this meets a German billionaire. And he asks the German billionaire why he's so successful. And the German billionaire brings his arms wide and basically pulls them together to one point and says, because I only look at one point in the future. And it's interesting because softening your gaze, I always think of like when we were kids, you had those magic eye drawings, right? Like you could never see them. And then when you really soften your gaze, you see the full picture. And that for me is how like that interaction with the world is. You're looking out to the distance, you're softening your gaze and you're opening things up, which again is this right hemispheric thing, which opens you up energetically.
Totally, totally, totally. 100%. It's beautiful. Great. I love, yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. Just to add into that then, Thomas, that piece about the heart and the heart's intelligence, and we speak about heart-brain coherence, because this is just the first step. The stability piece is just the first step. Then it's about opening the heart, and the heart allows for wide gaze. Yeah, when the heart closes, there's like immediate focus. What's the threat? And if we think about how we work in business, so there's competition energetics. We have to move from competition to collaboration if we're going to make it as a collective. Yeah, it's time to move out of personal development to collective transformation. And that means moving from competition to collaboration, right? So that's going to require a loosening, a softening of this grippiness that we have because we're terrified we might lose something, and an opening of the heart and understanding, like a deep knowingness at a cellular level, that we are all interconnected and that really we have to come together now to really help make the shift. That requires an opening of the heart, a softening of the gaze, and the humility to actually tune into the real context for our existence, which is not just our local area, not just our country or even this planet, but beyond this planet. We are on right now a spaceship that's called Mother Earth, flying through the galaxy at what, 6,000 miles an hour? Like at this moment, this very moment, our context is much bigger, and evolution is everywhere, including on our interior. So we just really need to tune into that and understand that even though it's difficult, like any good practice, like lifting weights at the gym, it's difficult initially to extract from the known. But if we really want to make it as a collective, but also enjoy the journey, that impulse, that higher intelligence, which comes through like as your soul, like those impulses, the calling for you as a soul, as a human being, that impulse, it's gonna have its way with you. You can go against it, but in the end, you will join it when you make your passing, right? You will join that evolutionary impulse when you have your transition. But why wait till then? Why not go with the current? It's like fighting the current of the ocean. Like, good luck with that, because the ocean's more powerful. So like, we've got to tune to how do we surf the wave of evolution and enjoy going through that tube, instead of actually trying to fight the current, which is higher intelligence and is asking us to pay attention, right? So life can be so much more joyful, more fun, lighter, and much more fascinating than by going with evolution than trying to go against it. There's an awful lot of suffering going against it. Mm-hmm.
I think that also gets lost in a lot of the po-faced spirituality for people that are trying to sell you things, right? Which is like my life since I started being driven much more this way is just like so hilariously fun. I find myself in Aspen. I'm going to Japan in a couple of weeks. Like the people I meet, the conversations I have, like you, like there are people that are driven by this energy, and you can see it in their eyes. You can see it in their lives. Like the linearity of being in a cubicle that a lot of people think is their destiny. Like you would have to pay me $3 million a year to go back, and I don't even think I have a price anymore. I don't think I have a price to go back under the fluorescent lights and work for somebody else's time. Like, anyway, right. Enough of a rant. So you said there's stability. Is there somewhere else you want to go from here?
Yeah, heart coherence, right? So that heart-brain coherence. So there's loads of scientific research to back this up, by the way. Heart-brain coherence is essentially where the heart and the brain begin to synchronize together in their patterning. And it creates it creates so much greater well-being, greater cognitive capacity. So all kinds of like greater access to creativity. There's so many levels to it, but I think the piece that's often missing or not spoken about is that the heart, and this is again at an energetic level. So energetics are super important, remembering that 99% of reality is energetic, right? So the energetic piece that's often missing out of the heart-brain coherence conversation is that when you actually look at the structure of the heart chakra and the structure of the crown chakra, again, this is from pranic healing, so I really want to honor that lineage. So the heart chakra actually matches the center of the crown chakra. So it actually fits in like a lock, like a key in a lock, right? So when you begin to open the heart, the crown begins to oscillate. So the heart oscillates, and then the crown oscillates. And when you open the crown, when the heart opens, there's greater connectivity to the non-physical, the energetic, and that's where you get connected to the spirit world. And that's where you, the being, the soul, now we're going and fully like, I'm asking permission, but not really. I'm going to ask for forgiveness later, whatever that expression is. Like now it's really when it starts getting so multidimensional and so juicy. And that's where we begin to understand that there are legions of non-physical beings waiting to assist us. But we have to add, there's no assertion in this universe. We have to ask, we have to choose to engage. And yet there are signs, and I'm sure you've had your signs. I had an astonishing call one time, many years, a couple of decades ago. This is wild, but it was like, there's so many mystical experiences. I could go on an absolute bender now talking about the experiences I've had because I love them so much and I'm always looking for them. But one that was very early on in a very concrete way, pardon the pun, was when I was crossing the road in Sydney one time. I was like standing on the edge of the pathway, which is the sidewalk for the Americans, right? So I was standing on the sidewalk, and as I was just about to step out, next minute, this shard of energy, like it was like a bolt of lightning, ran straight down through my body, all the way down through my face, like an electric voltage that was just beyond words. And it made my face vibrate, and my two eye teeth, like just it went right through there, and it was like, and it came so hard and fast that it glued me to the ground in the way that lightning would like do that. It was so fast, it was spontaneous out of nowhere. And when it hit me, Tom, I got the smell of blood and the taste of metal in my mouth. Right? It was like, whoosh, like this. And I literally stopped. And a split second later, this big 4-wheel drive truck broke the lights across the road and literally went straight in front of me. And it was a 4-wheel truck with one of those cattle grids on the front of it, you know, the bars.
Yeah.
So if I'd stepped out in front of it, it would have smashed me in the face and I would have had this taste of metal, smell of blood. So it was an absolute angelic, like complete intervention that was like life-saving, literally in that moment. I had another one where I was many years later driving down the road very early in the morning, the country roads in Ireland, bit naively because I'm actually from the city. And it was winter time, and I'm driving down the road at like 50 miles an hour, which wasn't fast, but it was a country road. And there were about 5 cars behind me, which is kind of a lot at 5 in the morning. But anyway, they were behind me. I was driving along, and next minute I hit black ice. And the car started to spin like this, and I could feel, I was like trying to control, and it started to spin, and it spun and spun, and all I did was I just screamed for my guides. I was like, I need your help now. And I had a full on experience of moving stuff I don't know how to do, but my hands moving the wheel and directing the car in a way that not only did I not crash, I didn't hit anyone behind me. The car spun around, and I ended up literally pulled into the next driveway on the side of the road. Now I was shaken and I was traumatized. However, how I did not crash at that time it's beyond me. Like, these are just 2 examples. There's so many more. I could talk for many hours about the mystical experiences, but I guess the point is, what I really want to share with your listeners is that there's so much help for you here if you can open up your own interior and stop thinking like all the responsibilities on your shoulders. It's really key, because it's exhausting to think that you have to solve everything. If we can open up to the field of evolutionary intelligence, consciously connect, and just remain open to the possibility that there's higher insight, greater tools, greater downloads waiting to be received by you, not efforting to create by you, but received and translated by you, then it will take so much pressure out of the equation. It's just beautiful. It's just waiting for us to ask.
So conceptually, right? Like as I said earlier, if you start to see energy as primary, then the idea that there would be entities and beings, negative and positive, again, comes back on the table. But
Yeah.
there's this dynamic that I've run into all the time as someone who straddles my previous life of, where this would all have sounded like absolute nonsense. But I also like interface with that community a lot as well.
Yeah.
It's this very, it's anger. It's a deep anger that people get when they face these ideas because they're also a little bit like, well, screw you, right? Like I'm struggling with all these different things in my life and people keep talking about spirit guides and angels. Where are my spirit guides and angels? And this is one area where I'm kind of in that camp because I've had a bunch of people like surprisingly normal people who I trust that are like, yeah, you've got a whole bunch of spirit guides. And I understand the concept of free will, that if like the first rule of the universe is free will, that you can't infringe on anyone else's free will. So you have to ask for help. And I would say my life is going pretty bloody great, like amazingly good. And so occasionally I ask for help and then I don't really know if I'm getting the help back. A couple of weeks ago, I did ask for help and I felt I did get the help back through a very conventional way. But like the utterly unfair question I'm going to ask you that's impossible to answer, but I'm going to do it anyway, is how do you know? Or can you know that like you have spirit guides? Like it worked for you, but like how does someone start to find out?
It's a great question. I love your framing. That's an impossible question. I love it. But yeah, how do you know that you have spirit guide? Firstly, let's just go to the piece that, and I'm closing my eyes because I want to go kind of a little bit more interior to kind of tune a little bit more. So this is beautiful territory, firstly. Firstly, just to say that, that piece about permissions is really, really important, Tom. And it's very important because if you think about if every being that wanted to give you help just gave you help all at the same time, you'd be splat on the ground with the amount sent to you. You wouldn't be able to handle it, right? None of us would be able to handle it. So that's the first thing. So the permission, but I'm going to talk about the process. Maybe how do you know is about understanding the process of how you connect.
Perfect.
Because if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's really helpful.
Yeah. So one thing is to be aware. First of all, we follow the logic that everything is energy. When we're in the energetic space, we're non-physical. When we're non-physical, it's where we begin to get access to the higher frequency beings, right? So let's put it this way. The skill set of learning how to connect with which spirits is very important, right? Or which frequency of spirit is very important. As one of my teachers, Master Stephen Coe, would say, there's no SEC in the spirit world.
Yeah.
Right? There's no regulatory body saying, look, so it's up to us to understand the skill set, to develop the skill set, to be able to connect with this field of infinite possibility. So one of the ways, or the absolutely essential way, would be to begin by understanding that you have frequency power. So that means that your choice of what frequency you're connecting into is the starting point. Now, how do we do this? We do this through something called an invocation. An invocation is essentially, lots of different ideas around it. In a nutshell, invocation is calling in higher frequency beings that are within a specific frequency range, right? And so I remember one time when I was working on a business project, this woman, this partner I was co-creating with, she turned around and she said to me, okay, this is early in our relationship, we're going to invoke, right? Because you wouldn't start working without invoking, would you? And I'm like, oh, no. I'm like, what's invocation? Right? Because like, who knows this stuff and who teaches this stuff in the business world, right? So the invocation is essentially going, okay, back to the SEC analogy. We've got to locate ourselves with like an energetic GPS That means that we need to locate where we want to, what frequency we want to be attracting the beings from. Yeah, what frequency we want to occupy. And so what that means is that we begin to set intentionality. So intention is very important in relation to energy. We can speak a little bit more about this, but where attention goes, energy flows. We know this. This is a fact. This can be. We can speak more about that. So essentially, we're setting the intention of who we're wanting to connect with. And the first being you want to connect with is your own soul, your higher self, your divine spark. Because the bottom line is we want sovereignty here. Yeah, sovereignty. So we are learning how to become more expanded souls, essentially more evolved souls. So that's the first place, is that verticality. But then you may have particular consciousness threads that you might like to work with. For example, Christ consciousness is one that I work with, very important to me because it's got such a pristine center point. Now, I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about the consciousness of Christ consciousness, right? So that unconditional love piece. There's also another line of consciousness, which personally I do love to connect with, which is the Buddhic teachings, like as you would hear Buddhism, which is the principle. Really, I create my reality and I'm connected to the universe. And so there's a consciousness around that. Buddha, Kuan Yin, goddess of love and compassion, and so on. So there may be some beings that you particular streams of consciousness that you particularly like to connect with yourself. I strongly recommend working with Archangel Michael. Archangel Michael really is well known for helping with the crafting of clear boundaries, cutting energetic cords, creating a safe space, a protected space, not in the sense of defending against anything, but just creating clear boundaries, right? So I always work with him. It's very important for me to work with him. So sovereignty with your own soul, then connection into the lines of consciousness that you want to attract, and then strongly recommend working with the beings who are known to be like masters of specific disciplines. And there's lots we can talk about in detail about that, or you can research who those archangels are and so on. Archangel Raphael, Uriel, Gabriel, and so on. They all have different specialties. So the piece that's so beautiful here is that, let's say you don't relate to any of those. Let's say there's no relationship whatsoever in your awareness, or you don't even want to go there. That's okay too. What you do in your invocation is you call in the frequency that you want to embody. So for example, I call in the frequency of divine love, divine light, divine clarity. They're the three that I work with. You may have yours. You might want the frequency of grace, the frequency of compassion, the frequency of forgiveness. And so you work with the frequency that you want to embody and connect with, and that you maybe want to learn from, get some support from. All of this is available to you like a current in the ocean. They're like currents in the ocean of consciousness. Yeah. So this is the starting point for invocation. We can go deeper on it, but I don't want to overwhelm people. But this is just this principle. What is the principle? The principle is no SEC in the energetic world. We want to have a energetic GPS. That means we want to locate what kind of frequencies we want to connect with. Within the frequencies, you can call in at the pure level, just the frequency of love, light, clarity, whatever vibration you want to occupy. And then you can also, if you want to go further, call in the actual direct assistance of your personal guides, of your particular teachers who may be in those lines of consciousness or other lines of consciousness. Yeah. So it's about tracking your own system's resonance and just trust. And that's another word that's coming through here from one of my teachers, is like that thing of trust, that if you feel resonance, even with these words, that this is a transmission that happens to come through another human being, but is really a message from your soul to you.
Well, I heard someone say the other day, I always have to caveat that I'm at least a presumably normal person, but I don't think I am anymore, because I have a painting of Archangel Michael above my desk, done by a woman who does paintings of angels, and I felt called. Didn't really know. I knew Michael was a voice, but I felt called to have him above my desk, and it's a beautiful, beautiful painting.
Oh my God, I've got an Archangel Michael necklace here. You can't even see it. Literally an angelic necklace. Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah.
But I did hear someone say that if you call in Archangel Michael, he's just going to point you upstairs, right? That this idea that like I don't know where my relationship to all of this stuff is. When I think most people I speak to have the same arc, which is that they went through like the either not questioning it magical thinking stage of religion or the not caring stage of like Christmas and Easter style religion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Then
yeah.
then you go to university and you realize that's all idiotic and there's no God and you become like a college atheist. And if you're lucky, you grow out of that and you start to realize that, oh blimey, it's all metaphorical, and the metaphors point to something that's actually archetypally real. For me, I'm still in some sort of weird liminal space, but I do think about it in the context of evolutionary intelligence, which is the paradox of wanting. That's something I realize over and over again is that I think I'm probably very stupid when it comes to knowing what I want. Because if I look at the history of my life, there are things that I want, right? I want my business leading edge to become more loving and more resilient and full of good people. But that's a want I hold very lightly because what I've realized is that evolutionary intelligence is like indescribably smarter than me. And if I start wanting things that lead me away from that direction, you go off the rails really fast. And everyone intrinsically knows that, right? Like if I
Yeah.
want to be a managing director by 32 and have 5 million in the bank, and then you get there and you're like, oh shit, I've wasted my life, right? Like I speak to those people like 10 times a week. So everyone knows it's kind of dumb. The thing I've started doing every so often is prayer, which again, like I feel like a little triggered by. But what I pray is, "Thy will be done." I finally understood that, right? Which is like evolutionary intelligence, God, whatever you want to call it, whatever thing triggers you the least, make me a tool of that. And then that makes people think, oh, that's going to be not very fun. And what I've found is it's literally the most fun outcome, right? Thy will
Right.
be done is literally the most fun outcome at all times. I'm not saying it's all roses, but it's definitely it's the most fun timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's go into the logic of why that is. Because, and this is beautiful, Tom, and thanks for sharing that because it's gorgeous. It's like next level. It's beautiful. So yeah, so why would prayer and thy will be done? Jeez, I didn't think we are going to go all this way, but this is deadly.
Listen, if people are still listening, we're an hour and 20 minutes in. They're in for the ride now. We can get pretty weird. Yeah.
Let's go all the way.
Yeah.
We're going to go into, let's say, the divine plan or thy will be done, which is the things coming to you and through you rather than being created by you, right? Rather than by personality. Um, why is it logical that it's more fun than ever? Because higher frequency society, higher frequency systems, higher frequency organizations exist on a higher frequency of thought. And so what gives you higher frequency is following your bliss. It's back to
Mm.
Joseph Campbell. So let's invert it. If you want to be able to hear the divine more clearly, follow your bliss. Because as you do follow your bliss and you raise your vibrational frequency, you literally connect in with the noble thoughts, the ideas, the vibrational possibilities that are just waiting for you to hook into that frequency like on a radio dial in order that you be able to download the information that's waiting for you there. I always say that crack is a strategic imperative, and I'm not talking about cocaine. I'm talking about the Irish word crack, meaning fun. Why is fun a strategic imperative in this mode of conscious creation with the divine? It's because when you have crack, when you're having great fun, when you're alive to life, when you're not thinking about anything, you're just present in the current moment, feeling aliveness, the current of life moving through you, you are open and at the frequency where the divine can say hello in the form of a barrel tube that you're surfing through, or the beautiful person in front of you that you're laughing with, or the flowers that you're smelling, or whatever it is. You are present to life. When you have the crack, when you have fun, you let go of the noise of intellect, the noise of ego and personality, and you come into the infinite beauty of the possible, of the divine right there and then. It's actually very simple. I was about to say easy. It's not necessarily easy, but it's definitely simple. But we've got to demystify the mystical and make it practical. And that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any skeptics still listening, one of the things I think about is the idea of combinatorial explosiveness, which is effectively any environment you inhabit, particularly if you are like have a sophisticated form of consciousness like humans do, there's an infinite number of options.
Yeah.
And if the world is energetic, then it makes sense that whatever intelligence programmed this, if it's not just a random series of of atoms and dirt and it's all like a random coincidence, if you assume that that's maybe not what's going on, then the right path would feel better. Now you have to be really careful, right? Like, there's crack and there's crack. Like, crack cocaine probably feels pretty good, and the crack feels great, but in a more meaningful and wholesome way. So,
Yeah.
like, it doesn't mean hedonism. And I think that part of
No.
becoming more energetically sophisticated is
Yeah.
understanding, what a higher frequency call means relative to something that's going to kind of pull you apart in the long run.
Yeah, there should be no price, Tom. There should be no price to the crack. There's a price, a big price to pay by snorting cocaine all weekend. There's a huge drop in vibration as a result of that temporary lift. Now, it's understandable how the temporary lift can sometimes come in the earlier days of experimentation. But then, and this is another piece I want to say, is that it's also, we're not bypassing contrast. So we're not bypassing the benefit of struggle and suffering, not wanting to invite that as the way of being in the world. I think we need to evolve past that. But we are also not going to bypass and say there's benefit to struggle. If you look at your journey, right, and I look at mine, and anyone who's listening, if you observe yours, like, you will already know that you learned and evolved through contrast, and you are the person you are today because you took the turn of the evolutionary spiral. And like in this conversation, Tom, when I listened to when your journey, I know your journey and what brought you here, and the tremendous pivot that you had to do in order to be able to align with the evolutionary calling, and fair play to you for doing it in the most extreme circumstances. So contrast has served us, right? And we want to, rather than kind of looking for challenges or looking for contrast, we want to align with flow and have the most fun possible at the highest frequency possible. And when we fall off our surfboard, that's okay. There's a lesson to learn, but we get back on the surfboard. So we locate ourselves in the correct direction, in the optimal direction, which is onwards and upwards.
Yeah, I've said this many times, but I keep coming back to it, that like, in all the woosphere stuff I've consumed, particularly more recently, the thing that's really helped me the most is this idea of soul lessons and earth school, that you basically make a set of pre-incarnative choices to come here and learn lessons to either reverse some karma or to
Yeah.
just essentially get more loving and creative and do what you love in service of love. And then it's made me much more resilient to adversity. I haven't had anything really badly go wrong since I've had this view. We'll see, right? But it's like, oh, is this something I was supposed to learn in order to create kind of an adversarial growth stage? Or is this something that's just me being dumb, right? And not listening to the messages? And I think that there's an interesting balance that I still don't fully understand, which is like, if you ignore evolutionary intelligence, the lessons get worse and worse and worse. So, and that's why a lot of people end up with near-death experiences, or like me, like horrendous periods of depression, where
Yeah.
God shouts to us in our pains, as C.S. Lewis said. And so there is this question that I always have, which is like, if you listen a little earlier, it's good. And if you do have this army of people on your side, just been, look, dude, Tom, Emily, just ask, right? Just ask. We're right here waiting for you. Just, if you knew we existed and
Yeah.
you were just willing to ask, you would struggle a lot less. And that really speaks to a lot of the meaning of my life, which is like, it's unnecessary suffering versus necessary suffering. Like, this
Yeah.
necessary suffering that's part of your curriculum that you're just gonna have to go through. And then
Yeah.
there's the stuff that's ignorance that like maybe you can address through just experimenting. Like, I really love this idea of the book of evidence, that when I felt I was for a long story, but I had a delusion that I was damned for a long time. And part of me still does. And um it was about, I felt during that stage that I had to actually believe that Jesus was born on this date, was crucified on this date, was resurrected 3 days later. Otherwise, I was damned. I had a bunch of like earlier stage Christians be like, if you don't believe in Jesus, you are going to hell forever. And when you're in a relatively impressionable psychological state, you believe it. It's no longer an abstract idea. You do have this idea of burning in hell, and you are already psychologically burning in hell. So it's an incredibly easy proposition. But instead, I now frame it as the book of evidence, which is, yeah, you're going to have to make the first move. You're going to have to make the first move because you don't get shit for free. But once you make the first move, you can look for evidence, right? And the
Yeah.
and the world provides you evidence back. It may not provide you double-blinded, randomized controlled trial evidence. In fact, it usually doesn't, but it will provide you evidence if you're willing to give it a chance.
Yeah, 100%, and really nicely put. Um, I guess the question that might be useful is maybe just to briefly just say, how does that evidence show up? How
Mm.
does the universe speak to us, right? So I think there's many, many ways, but if it's useful, like one of the ways is synchronicity, obviously,
Oh, yeah,
right? So
yeah, yeah,
the Archangel Michael, you've got Archangel Michael on your wall, and I've got
yeah,
him. That's not coincidence.
yeah.
You know what coincidence means? It's the perfect coincidence, the perfect convergence of two dynamics at the exact same time at the right moment together, right? So it's coincidence. And so coincidence is like synchronicity, actually. It's got intelligence behind it. There's a convergence point with subjective meaning for both of us that happens to converge at a moment in time. So synchronicity is one. The other thing that is really common in the Book of Evidence is highlights in conversation. So you can be chatting to somebody and then they say something and it seems to sort of jump out at you.
Mm.
Jumping out at you, pay attention, because that is a vibrational, your system is picking up on a vibration where your inner being is saying to you, this message here, right? So that's kind of like in conversation. That same thing can happen when you're walking in the street, walk into a magazine store, and you can see a title jump out at you. Or so you come out of meditation and a couple of minutes later your kids say something to you and it has a ping to it. These are all ways that the universe is talking to you vibrationally, right? It's a skill set to begin to recognize that there's a connection between the intentionality, the asking that you have, these different ways of communicating, and then the feedback loop that you can bring your book of evidence to you in a more quantifiable way. So it's about following the energy, as you said. You said follow your bliss.
Mm.
Kind of core edict within evolutionary intelligence is follow the energy. If the energy is light, expansive, and upward in terms of vibration, it's aligned with a light, expansive, upward direction. And can we give ourselves permission to follow that instead of following the social programs? There's no things should be difficult and you have to work hard for them. It's like, no, let's get real clarity. This is about shifting from matter lock consciousness into increasing our EVIQ, which is your evolutionary intelligence quotient, which is the ability, the degree to which you have tuned into your deeper relationship with the field and how much you're allowing that inform your experience. That's your EVIQ.
I live that way actually now, and that's again talk about like crappy superpowers. I used to basically go through hundreds of research reports in a week when I was in banking to look for the insights. And so I was training that pattern recognition, but they weren't like interesting insights. They were like Apple's going to raise numbers or whatever it is, right? Like it would be something relatively pedestrian, but it trained a skill. But
Right.
the way it manifested in a dark way for me is that pre personal crisis, what I would do is I would amplify things that served my ego. Here is an incredibly complex idea from someone that speaks with great intelligence and sophistication that actually once I dug into it later, I realized it was deeply nihilistic and like dangerously negative. And then on the other side of my crisis, I would encounter ideas like that and I'd be like, oh, no, there's no charge to them, right? Let someone else amplify them, but there's no charge to them. And
Yeah.
instead, I would encounter someone like Ian McGilchrist and his hemisphere theory, and it would make me come alive. And like some psychos can read this stuff and not want to share it with people. Like my combination of working in that background in finance, but also like my personality makeup is if I encounter an idea that I think is going to change and save lives, for me, I feel like I have a moral duty. And so what I do now is I just pay really close attention, and I'm getting better at it with every passing month of like, oh, she just said something really interesting. I used to call it sticky ideas. Like the first one I heard, funnily enough, the biggest one of my life was in, of all people, a Jordan Peterson podcast before he went a little bit nuts. And basically, he said that Carl Jung had this idea that your future self signaled to you by directing your interest towards what was interesting in the present. So, ironically, or not ironically, but appropriately, my
Yeah.
first sticky idea was about the idea of sticky ideas. That like
Yeah.
ideas that loop in your head that you won't. It's like there's something there, there's something there, there's something there, and it comes
Yeah.
with energetic charge. So I completely
Yeah.
understand that. Yeah.
Beautiful. So let's go. That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. And one piece now, I'm going to ask you a question. So, did you notice when you feel that resonance, does it feel like a chemical thing or an electrical thing in your system?
Not, I don't think I even have enough somatic intelligence to answer that question.
Mm.
It feels like excitement. So I guess it's energetic. It's like, I'm like, oh, I'm excited to read more about that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So resonance, if you think about the quivering of a bow, like a bow and arrow, or a violin string, it's a little bit like that coming down through your central nervous system. So when you feel that quivering, ooh, resonance, it's like literal vibration. When there's that vibration is moving through the center part of your body, as opposed to emotions, which are really chemical. Yeah, it's like anger. It's like also out in the extremities, like I'm excited. I'm like angry. Like those extremities are one thing, that chemical emotion fix. But then there's the resonance, which is a deeper knowing, that deeper knowing, Tom. And that piece that you just said about your future self sending messages back to you, that's like, oh, that is a sweet, sweet, sweet example. It's beautiful. So do you still follow that now?
I mean, it's literally the foundation of my life because it's what like, so the like almost bringing this all together, right? So like I'll consume ideas and then I'll have certain ones working in my psyche all the time, like combinations of ideas. And then
Yeah.
I'll wake up in the morning one day and it will all have coalesced during that time period into something that's an article, and that will lead me into like whatever's coming next. So like it's almost as if it all comes together and it's leading me somewhere, like I don't know where, but it's
Yeah.
it's it's really really fun.
Yeah, beautiful. That's a little bit like Steve Jobs, you can only connect the dots looking back.
Mm,
Yeah, but if you can trust, and that's that word again, if you can trust that there's intelligence behind the resonance, that it's like pre-coded for you. Yeah, pre-coded information, and that you're feeling that resonance, you're continuing to follow it, that it's leading somewhere good, it's leading somewhere that you're meant to be, it's leading somewhere that's already calling you. And so
yeah,
you'll recognize it when you are there, you'll recognize it because you've been following the breadcrumbs on the golden trail, like, right?
yeah,
It's so delicious. I mean, people talk about meeting someone, they recognize them. I know you from somewhere, maybe past life or something, where I recognize you as a great love. Whatever that thing, there's a sort of a precognition piece. There's actually some really interesting research, if we want to take it out of woo and into science, but it's still kind of woo, which is deadly. Is that there's some great science done by Dr. Dean Radin on precognition. And so they were using random number generators as an exploration of how human consciousness is converging to lots of different sensors around the planet. And at the time of 9/11, so producing ones and zeros randomly. And so there was no coherence whatsoever on an ordinary day. But around 9/11, suddenly became very coherent as the collective consciousness all started to look in one direction. But the kind of spooky thing is that the coherence began to happen before the planes hit.
yeah,
Same with Princess Diana's death. That other huge convergence point is that the coherence began to show up in the hour before it actually happened. In the hour before, there was a global broadcasting of her passing in the tragic way that she did. So how is that possible? Because there's energetic information in the field before something materializes. In other words, energy precedes matter.
yeah.
And that's so key. So doesn't that even begin to inform how we might want to pay attention to our relationship with energy, and what energy are we putting out into the world? Because that which we're putting out, we're gonna attract back.
Well,
Yeah.
in fact, I interviewed a guy called Dr. Ulysses Di Corpo last year, and he's come up with this theory of syntropy based on a relatively obscure Italian mathematician from the 40s. And the basic TLDR is that there's a symmetrical force of entropy. You're going to die, right? which is syntropy is essentially speaking to evolutionary intelligence, which
Yeah.
is there's a force which he says comes from the future
Yeah.
that's directing your interest in the present, exactly as
Yeah.
Tom said. But what's interesting is he ended up marrying a psychologist, I think Antonella was her name, and she then brought into his work the precognitive work, which shows that your body reacts to a stimulus, to an emotional stimulus, before it gets it. So they had, I think, random cards that would produce a stimulus, and they showed that the body had a specific emotional response to those cards a fraction
Yeah.
of a second before it happened. Now,
Yeah.
a fraction of a second, how helpful is that? But I think what it does show is it opens the door to this possibility that like I don't really care about the time travel stuff, and are we all living in one timeline? I don't care. I find it like an impractical way to live. But the idea that your future self is guiding you in the present, I find
Yeah.
is highly practical because it opens you to the possibility that these evolutionary intelligence signals are coming to you with a high
Yeah.
degree of intelligence from either your future self or God or whatever you want to call it.
100%, Tom. And the thing is that if we really look a little more closely, we'll see that it's a sensing intelligence, right? In that instance, that before they saw the card, the system began to react, the body began to react to it. So, but how? It wasn't through intellect because it hadn't physically seen it.
Mm.
So it's an energetic sensing intelligence, and that's why the building of the capacities, the skill sets to be able to sense into the emerging future. This is it. It's like sensing into the emerging future. So if we talk about AI, for example, we look at AI, and there's lots of controversy about AI, it's, of course. However, there's also an evolutionary perspective, which is that if we look at it through the lens of one facet, nevertheless, however, let's look through it. The lens is that AI is going to take care of all of the traditional cognitive linear processing, data processing that we have had to labor for so long. And so what are we left with? What's going to distinguish us is going to be our capacity to sense, because AI is working with the known, yes, brilliant, genius derivations and complex possibilities within the known. Nevertheless, it's not holding the future. It can't, because it's working off the data that we've given it. So the singular thing that we have the capacity to do, that AI will never be able to do, is to sense into the emerging future in the intangible unknown and pick up those vibrational frequencies and then download them into practical mental models, new systems, new coherent aligned action, and material reality. That's something AI will never do. And that's really essential.
But what's funny is it relates back to this point as well. I look at AI and obviously I'm a little bit freaked out about it, but I think that one of the ideas of AI, one of the uses of AI that might work, assuming you have a lot of discernment around it, is using it to identify patterns and lessons you may be missing in an entirely backward looking way. And then in a
Yeah.
forward looking way, there's this white space that no one seems to have claimed in the corporate world, which mystifies me because I'm not interested in doing it, but there's billions of dollars there, which is great. How do you become more right hemispheric? How do you do what you're doing in terms of helping people really lean into this? And you can do it in a 1 out of 10 woo way, and you can do it in a 10 out of 10 woo way. I did a series last year that started off at 1 out of 10 and it ended up at 10 out of 10, right? There's a lot of different there's a lot of different ways you can do this. The thing that freaks me out in a very straightforward way though is that, like, so here's a random thing that happened to me once. I once started reading a book called Complexity by Waldrop, and it's about the founding of the Santa Fe Institute. And it is, in my opinion, a really dull book. It's like, here's this economist who came, and here's this systems theorist who came. And yet I was like utterly, utterly transfixed by it. And then in the last chapter, they talk about how life is this balance between order and chaos. And there was something in there that stuck. But there was something in me that was tearing through this really boring book to get to this chapter at the end without
Right.
knowing why I was getting to the end. So the thing that scares me about AI is that AI will tell you what's relevant in a book, right? I'll be like, summarize complexity for me. And it'll be like, well, this economist met Emily. And I'll be like, okay, now I've read complexity. Whereas actually the sticky ideas, the chance that the AI is going to get the sticky ideas for you, it's not 100%. I don't know what percentage it is because you're relatively unique and your direction is relatively unique.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
just don't think AI has the context on you to be able to do that. So, like, read your own books, guys. Don't use AI to
Yeah.
summarize them.
Yeah. Or if you have to, in a pragmatic way, if you're in a time crunch and you're wanting to use something, be very clear about what your filters and instructions are. Like, what is your instruction? What are your perceptual filters? And direct it that way. And maybe another kind of aspect of the book of evidence is then cross-check when you have time. Then cross-check, did it get it? So that could be a little experiment actually to do with complexity. Is actually such a great name for a book as well. I'm going to write a book called Simplicity.
Nah.
It's like, okay, so even if you gave the instruction, find me the mystical message in this book, what chapter would you reference? And then see what it comes up with based on your profile, and then go back. Well, you don't need to go back and read because you know, but it'd be very interesting to see, does it come up with anything, akin to what you've spoken about that last chapter.
I've tried it a bunch and it doesn't. For me, yeah, I've tried it a bunch and it doesn't. It can't surface relevance, and it can't do good forward-looking things.
Oh my God, Tom! Isn't that a lesson for all of us?
Well, I've done a kind of controlled experiment, which is like I'm like, it's got all my history, right? So I'm like, using my history, what idea do you think I'm going to discover next, right? Like what do you think is next on my route?
Yeah.
Most of its answers are pablum and pointless, but it never anticipates what idea I'm going to come up with next. And the danger is that it would actually misdirect me. But I think I'm strong enough in my intuitions to not let it do that. But
Yeah.
it shows it can't be on that edge of chaos. It can't.
There you go. That's exactly it. And so this is, I'm really glad you're saying this, because this is then going to the point where people are becoming hypnotized by technology and giving their power away to technology in many respects. Without, and this is to me, I don't like to use the word dangerous, but highly risky dynamic, which is that they're doing that in the context of so many of the religions having sort of fallen away for many people, and not having spiritual practice in place and not having divine connection active. So it's like the only benchmark is this technology, when in fact the divine intelligence is so superior, as we know, because AI would only have come through via the divine, the minuscule subset of the divine. So I think there's a wider context here, Tom, in terms of like our social design, our social architecture going forward, is that if we don't have the divine in the mix, like, we've forgotten nature, we've forgotten who we are and where we've come from. And the really key thing is going to be saying it in language, delivering it in language where it's relatable and practical and everyday, and not too woo until you want it, and then you can go all the way. Right? But it needs to be logical, structured, and progressional in a way that's testable. And so important to my heart is that gives the sovereignty back to the person. There's no putting people on pedestals, or no putting people on, in hierarchical ways. For me anyway, I just feel very strongly about that, is we are all sovereign beings. We have our own inner being with all of the answers that we need, connected to the evolutionary intelligence or the divine. And so all we're doing is to helping people to make that connection between you and you. Yeah. You and the expanded you, which is delicious,
So we've done a great mix of practical and woo. Pretty perfect, I think. Is there anything else you think you want to leave us with in terms of like practices you haven't mentioned, stories you haven't told?
So many stories. I feel, 1 second, let me just tune for 1 second. I do feel that the message is, I could go on talking about channeling and the different states of consciousness that lead to channeling and so on, and that blah blah, but actually what I really feel is that the key is simplicity here. And if you are in a place where you're navigating complexity, the invitation that I'm sensing from the field, from the other side, from the beautiful beings that are here assisting this conversation, is that it's an invitation. The key is to bring it back to simplicity and the frequency of love. And we hear this, oh yeah, love, love, light and candy and lollipops and unicorns and stuff. All that stuff, right? Although unicorn actually relates to 3D sight, which is why our interdimensional, multidimensional sight, third eye sight. So that's a whole other thing. But in esoteric circles, that has a completely different meaning. But which is why the horn is in the center of the. Anyway, we're going into a different area now. Keeping it simple. This frequency of love is that when we're navigating complexity, and especially in times of liminality and intangibility, where the old world is so loud and the new as it's falling, and then the new world's not quite here yet, we're in this in-between space. How do you navigate the uncertainty of that? You have your personal stability practices, absolutely, and then the skill set to connect to the beautiful, loving intelligence that's available to you. But your litmus test in decision making, and this is like everything from, should I go for this job? Should I leave this position? Should I make the decision in this direction? Should I take a risk and do this? Should I trust this teacher? Do I trust this spiritual teaching? Do I trust, whatever it is, whatever your question is, the litmus test in decision making for coherence with your own inner being, your sovereignty, is, does this, first of all, does it make sense? Yeah, does it make sense to me? Is it logical? But secondly, and much more importantly, does it hold resonance? If it makes sense to you logically and it holds resonance, meaning it's vibrating through the center of your being, meaning that your heart opens, meaning that your energy field expands, meaning that the vibration uplifts, then you can trust it as part of your path. And so this is just cutting through all the noise and all the practices and the tools. This is really center point. That's all you need. Follow that energy and then all will be well. Yeah, because your inner being already has all the keys that you need. Truly.
That's just beautiful. There's this allegedly channeled text called Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh.
Yes.
And he just says, if you're ever facing a tough decision, ask yourself, what would love do? And
Yeah.
I use it. Like, I use it all the time. I'm like, oh no, I already know the right choice. It may not be the choice I want to make because it's what would love do. And I think there's something else you said that's really important. And I think it's something I've written a lot about recently, which is there's a great quote from Wendell Holmes, which is I wouldn't give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I'd give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. That there is this sort of like, you can make it simple, but don't make it simple when you don't have any discernment, right? Like, you
Yes.
that intellect. We're integrating this very strong masculine into the feminine. If you don't integrate it into the feminine, boy, there's going to be problems. That's what we're going through as a group. That's this return to intuition, but it's a return. Like, I think very few people can operate like this from birth. And then it's like, it's still finding a way to integrate that discernment. So I think you're absolutely spot on.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. I love you saying that. Thank you so much for saying that. Yes. To me, it's the distinction between simplification, which is naivety, versus simplicity, which is the distillation of essence. That requires mastery. So, for example, mathematical theorem can be written in 25 pages or it can be written in a single sentence. The master encodes into that one sentence what's written in the 25 pages. That's simplicity.
I think that is a beautiful place for us to stop. Emily Lane, this has been exactly what I thought it would be, which is wonderful. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Tom Morgan. Thank you so much for really being such a pioneer in bringing this amazing conversation that you're bringing with the leading edge, actually bringing all the pieces together and creating a space where we can have a more expanded view of life and as a result become more potent and more impactful. Yeah. So thank you so very much. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.